In the darkest corners of a prison cell, killers sometimes talk. And when they do, the truth doesn't always stay buried. In 2018, the world believed it knew everything about Chris Watts, the smiling father who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. His confession seemed final, his sentence permanent, the case closed. But years later, inside a concrete prison cell, a cellmate would come forward with a chilling claim, one that suggested Chris Watts had been lying all along. Tonight, we uncover what was allegedly said behind bars and why it may change how you see one of America's most infamous family annihilators. Before she became a headline, Shannon Watts was a mother, a wife, and a woman rebuilding her life. Born in 1984, Shannon grew up in North Carolina, known for her determination and outgoing personality. Friends described her as driven, someone who fought hard to overcome personal and health struggles, including lupus. She was deeply devoted to her daughters, Bella and Celeste, documenting their lives with pride and optimism on social media. To the outside world, the Watts family looked like the American dream. A new home in Frederick, Colorado. 2 smiling little girls. Another baby on the way. But behind closed doors, cracks were forming. Chris Watts, quiet, passive, seemingly gentle, was pulling away. By the summer of 2018, he was living a double life, secretly involved in an affair while pretending everything was fine. Shannon sensed it. Text messages to friends reveal growing fear, confusion, heartbreak, and desperation to save her marriage. She was pregnant, emotionally vulnerable, and increasingly isolated. What no one knew was that Shannon was living her final days. Because while she planned for a future with her children, someone inside that house was already planning something else. And according to later claims, the truth of what happened next may be far darker than the confession the world was given. Chris Watts was never the obvious monster. Co-workers described him as quiet. Neighbors said he was polite. Police body cam footage would later show a man who appeared calm, even cooperative, just hours after his family vanished. But beneath that calm exterior was a man unraveling. In 2018, Chris began an affair with a co-worker. An escape from responsibility, from fatherhood, from the life he felt trapped in. Friends would later say he spoke about wanting freedom, a new start, a life without obligations. What makes this case so disturbing is not just what Chris did, but how convincingly he played the role of a worried husband. During media interviews, he pleaded for his family's return. He smiled nervously. He begged on camera, and investigators noticed something chilling. He never asked where they were. He never demanded answers, and his emotional reactions didn't match the situation. Years later, a former cellmate would claim that Chris admitted something horrifying, that his original confession was incomplete and possibly designed to make him look less monstrous. If that claim is true, then the man the public thought they understood may not exist at all, because what Chris allegedly confessed in prison contradicts everything he told police. Shannon returned home from a business trip just after 2 a.m. Surveillance footage shows her entering the house, alive, pregnant, exhausted. She would never be seen again. What happened inside that home remains one of the most disputed aspects of the case. Chris originally claimed Shannon killed their daughters, and that he killed her in a rage. But later, he changed his story, then changed it again. Years later, a former cellmate would claim Chris said the murders were planned, not spontaneous. That he had rehearsed it in his mind long before that night. According to this alleged prison confession, Chris spoke calmly, without emotion, describing details that were never publicly released. If true, this suggests something terrifying, that the crime wasn't fueled by rage, but by calculation. Investigators believe the girls were alive when they were taken from the home, alive during the drive, alive in the final moments. And if Chris lied about how it began, what else did he lie about? Because the most disturbing claim was yet to come. By morning, Shannon was missing. Her phone, her purse, her car, still at home. And then came the call that would unravel everything. Shanann's friend contacted police for a welfare check. Body cam footage shows officers entering the house. Quiet, orderly, too orderly. Chris arrived soon after. Calm, cooperative, almost rehearsed. But investigators noticed something immediately. The bedsheets were gone. The house smelled cleaned. And Chris' story kept changing. Within days, surveillance footage, phone records, and GPS data painted a devastating picture. Chris had driven to a remote oil site owned by his employer. What police found there would confirm the worst fears imaginable. And while the case appeared closed after his conviction, the prison confession years later reopened old wounds. Because if the cellmate is telling the truth, then justice may have been built on a lie. Years after Chris Watts was sentenced to life without parole, the case appeared sealed. The public believed there were no more secrets left to uncover. Then a prison cellmate spoke. According to reports, this inmate spent extended time housed near Watts. Long nights, locked doors, no cameras, no investigators. Just two men, one convicted killer and one listener. The cellmate claimed that Chris talked freely, casually, as if unburdening himself, not with remorse, not with tears, but with detachment. The most disturbing part? Watts allegedly said his official confession was designed to make him appear less evil. A version of events that would soften public outrage, even though he was already doomed to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Why lie if there was nothing left to lose? According to the cellmate, Watts described the murders as fully planned, rehearsed in his mind days, possibly weeks, before Shanann ever came home that night. This wasn't rage. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. And the inmate said something else that sent chills through investigators who later reviewed the claim. Chris Watts allegedly said he knew the exact moment he decided his family had to die. And it wasn't the night of the murders. Most killers who confess show signs of emotional release, crying, shaking, regret. But according to the cellmate, Chris Watts showed none of that. He spoke like a man discussing logistics. He allegedly described the house, the timing, the drive, the silence, details that were never part of his public confession. The inmate would later say that what disturbed him most wasn't what Watts said. It was how calmly he said it. Chris reportedly explained that he had mentally walked through the murders over and over. That by the time they happened, he felt nothing. No fear, no guilt, no hesitation. Psychologists call this emotional dissociation, a mental separation that allows violent acts without empathy. If this prison confession is accurate, then Chris Watts didn't snap. He detached. And that raises a terrifying question. If his public confession was crafted, if his prison confession was candid, which version was the real Chris Watts? Because the most horrifying detail involved his children. This is the part many investigators struggle to discuss. According to the cellmate, Chris Watts allegedly admitted that the girls were not killed in the way he originally claimed. Not quickly. Not impulsively. He allegedly said they were aware, confused, asking questions. The inmate claimed Watts described moments of eye contact, moments that should have stopped him, but didn't. This contradicts the version Chris gave police, where he implied chaos and loss of control. If the cellmate's account is true, then Chris Watts consciously ignored his children's fear. That revelation alone reshapes the entire psychological profile of the crime. It suggests something far darker than desperation. It suggests complete emotional severance. And experts say this matters. Because when killers minimize their crimes publicly, they often reveal the truth only when they believe it no longer matters. And inside prison, nothing matters anymore, except the truth they carry with them. Criminologists have long known something unsettling. Killers often confess more truthfully in prison than they ever do to police. Why? Because there's no audience to impress, no plea deals, no family left to protect. Inmates talk to pass time, to feel powerful, to relieve boredom, sometimes to shock. Experts say prison confessions often reveal the most accurate version of events, especially when they're spoken casually, without emotional display. Chris Watts had nothing left to lose. So why keep lying? Unless the lie was told earlier to control the narrative. Investigators who later reviewed the cellmates' claims admitted that several details aligned with evidence never released publicly. That doesn't prove the confession is true, but makes it impossible to ignore. And it leaves one question hanging in the air. Did Chris Watts finally tell the truth? Or did he enjoy manipulating yet another listener? Because the answer may say more about his mind than his crimes. There are two possibilities. Either Chris Watts finally told the truth inside that cell, or he lied again, this time for sport. Experts say some killers manipulate even after conviction. They feed shocking details to see reactions, to feel control, to relive the crime without consequences. And Chris Watts has always been obsessed with control. Control over perception. Control over narrative. Control over how the world remembers him. Whether the prison confession was true or not, one thing is certain. Chris Watts is not the man he pretended to be. The smiling husband, the cooperative suspect, the remorseful killer. Those are masks, and prison stripped them away. But the most disturbing question still remains. What if the version he told in prison was the first time he ever stopped pretending? Criminologists use a chilling term for crimes like this: family annihilation. It's not about rage in the moment. It's about erasure. Experts say family annihilators often see their loved ones not as individuals, but as extensions of themselves. When the life they want collapses, they don't leave alone. They delete everything behind them. Chris Watts fits this profile with disturbing precision. He didn't lash out publicly. He didn't argue loudly. He didn't threaten. He withdrew. Psychologists say emotional withdrawal is often the final step before annihilation. The killer detaches mentally long before violence occurs. Friends later recalled how Chris seemed distant in the weeks leading up to the murders. Cold, mechanical, almost relieved. According to the cellmate, that detachment was already complete by the time he entered prison. And here's what experts find most alarming. Family annihilators often confess in fragments, each version designed to protect the image they still care about. What's shifting stories may not be confusion. They may be strategy, because his lies follow a recognizable pattern. Chris Watts didn't tell one story. He told many. First, he denied everything. Then, he blamed Shanann. Then, he accepted partial responsibility. Then, he adjusted the details. Each version shifted the weight of guilt. Investigators noted something critical. Every confession made Chris look slightly less monstrous than the last. And when confronted with evidence he couldn't explain away, he changed the narrative again. This is called confession minimization, a technique used by offenders to preserve a sense of moral identity. Even behind bars, the cellmate claimed Chris continued this behavior. He would reveal shocking details, then pull back, clarify, adjust, as if testing how much horror he could release without fully owning it. That suggests one thing. Chris Watts still cared deeply about how he was perceived, not as a father, not as a husband, but as a man who didn't want to be seen as the worst kind of monster. And that fear of being seen may have shaped every word he ever spoke. For many investigators, this case never truly closed, not because of missing evidence, but because of unanswered intention. Most crimes have a moment, an explosion, a trigger, a breaking point. This one didn't. Everything about Chris Watts suggests planning without emotion. And the prison confession, if accurate, supports that. Detectives involved in similar cases say this is what makes family annihilators so difficult to understand. They don't act like criminals. They act like men checking off a list. Even years later, investigators admit there are details they wish they had asked sooner. Questions about timing, about thoughts, about rehearsal. Because once a killer is sentenced, the incentive to tell the full truth disappears. And prison becomes the only place where truth might surface. But what if the truth is still being hidden? Amid the analysis, the confessions, the theories, it's easy to forget who mattered most. Shanann, Bella, Celeste. Shanann was a woman trying to save her family. Bella was a child described as gentle, thoughtful, protective of her sister. Celeste, full of energy, laughter, and trust. They were not characters in a crime story. They were people. And every new version of Chris Watts' confession threatens to distort that truth. Families of victims often say the same thing. The killer's words don't matter. The lives lost do. And yet, understanding the truth matters too. Because knowing how and why these crimes happen is the only way to prevent them from happening again. And remembering the victims is how we refuse to let them be erased. Even now, questions remain. Were all the details ever documented? Did Chris reveal everything to investigators? Or did the full truth only emerge in whispers behind concrete walls? Experts say some killers never fully confess, not because they're afraid, but because they enjoy owning a secret no one else can reach. If that's true, then Chris Watts may still be holding something back. And the cellmate's claim, true or false, forces us to confront something uncomfortable. That the official version of the crime may never be complete, because some truths die with the person who committed them. In true crime, there's a difference between justice and truth. Justice is a sentence, a verdict, a closed case. Truth is something else entirely. Chris Watts was convicted quickly. Life without parole. No trial. No prolonged courtroom battle. On paper, justice was served. But truth? Truth is fragmented. It lives in police interviews, in changing confessions, in prison whispers, in what was said and what was never asked. Some investigators believe the legal system did what it was designed to do. Others quietly admit something still feels unfinished, because justice doesn't always demand the full truth. And killers know that. They learn how much truth is required and how much can be kept. If the cellmate's account is accurate, then Chris Watts revealed more in prison than he ever did under oath. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If truth isn't required for justice, who does it really belong to? Cases like this don't just haunt investigators. They haunt the public. Chris Watts became a symbol, the smiling killer, the man who looked normal, the husband next door. Media coverage dissected his face, his words, his posture. But experts warned that obsession with the killer creates a dangerous myth. It centers the monster and pushes the victims into the background. Some criminologists argue that killers like Watts thrive on this attention, even after conviction. Every headline, every documentary, every replayed confession, it gives them relevance. And that's why prison confessions are so dangerous. They pull us back into the killer's orbit. The cellmate's story shocked the public, but also did something else. It gave Chris Watts a voice again. And the question becomes, are we uncovering truth or feeding the very darkness we're trying to understand? There are lessons hidden inside this tragedy. Hard ones, uncomfortable ones. Experts say many family annihilators don't fit stereotypes. They don't rage. They don't threaten. They withdraw. They isolate emotionally long before violence occurs. Warning signs often go unnoticed. Sudden detachment, secret lives, loss of empathy. The Watts case reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it cooperates. Sometimes it blends in. And perhaps the most chilling lesson of all, we may never truly know another person's inner world, especially when that world is built on lies. Before the story ends, it must return to where it belongs. With the victims, Shannon Watts was not a cautionary tale. She was a woman who loved fiercely, who fought for her family, who trusted someone she should never have had to fear. Bella and Celeste were not footnotes in a criminal profile. They were children, children who deserved safety, laughter, time. Every retelling of this case risks turning them into symbols instead of people. So we say their names. We remember their lives, not the way they died. Because remembrance is the only thing that robs a killer of total erasure. Some cases end with answers. This one ends with echoes. If the prison confession was true, then the world was never given the full story. If it was a lie, then manipulation followed Chris Watts all the way into his cell. Either way, one truth remains unchanged. 3 lives were stolen, and no confession, public or private, can undo that. Chris Watts will spend the rest of his life in silence, surrounded by concrete, locked away from the world he destroyed. But questions will remain. What did he really feel? When did he decide? And how much truth did he take with him? Some monsters are caught. Some stories are closed. But some truths never stop whispering in the dark. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or made you think, leave your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if you believe the victims should never be forgotten. And subscribe for more deep dive, true crime documentaries.